The Psychology of Money, the full masterclass. Part 1, The Great Financial Delusion. Imagine you're standing on a street corner in Manhattan, and you see a guy pull up in a bright red Ferrari. You don't even look at the driver, do you? No, you immediately imagine yourself in that seat. You think about how cool you'd look, how much respect you'd get, and how your life would finally feel complete. This is a great American delusion, and it's exactly why most people in the wealthiest country on earth are actually struggling. We've been sold a lie that finance is a math-based field like physics or engineering, where you follow the formula, you get the result. But money isn't about what you know in your head. It's about what you do in your gut. It's about behavior. If you want to understand why you're not as rich as you want to be, you have to stop looking at spreadsheets and start looking in the mirror. Think about Ronald Read. He was a guy from Vermont who worked as a gas station attendant for 25 years and then spent 17 years as a janitor at JCPenney. He lived in a tiny house, drove a beat-up car, and lived a life so quiet you wouldn't have noticed him if you walked right past him. But when he died in 2014, he hit the international news. This janitor had $8 million in the bank. He didn't win the lottery. He didn't inherit a cent. He just saved what he could and invested it in blue-chip stocks, then let time do the heavy lifting for half a century. Now, compare him to Richard Fuscone. This guy was the opposite. He was a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive. He was so successful he was featured in 40 Under 40 lists. He had a mansion with 2 elevators and 11 bathrooms. But Richard was playing a different game. He took massive risks, lived on the edge, and when the 2008 financial crisis hit, he went completely bust. He stood before a judge and admitted he had no money left. How does a janitor with no formal education outperform a Harvard MBA at the one thing the MBA is supposed to be an expert in? It's because money is the only field where a person with no credentials can beat a professional, provided they have the right temperament. You don't see a janitor performing heart surgery better than a doctor or building a skyscraper better than an architect. But in money, behavior is the X factor that overrides everything else. We live in a culture that rewards the hustle, the grind, and the quick win, but we rarely talk about the psychological baggage we carry from our childhoods or our social circles. Every single one of us has a money script running in our heads. If you grew up in a house where money was a source of constant fighting, you're going to view a bank account as a source of anxiety, not opportunity. If you grew up during the tech boom of the 90s, you probably think the stock market is a magic wealth machine. If you grew up during the Great Depression, you probably think it's a scam. Neither of these people is crazy. They are just operating based on the very limited set of experiences they've had in their lives. This is the first step to mastering the psychology of money, realizing that no one is actually crazy. Everyone is just trying to make sense of the world through their own tiny lens. But if you want to get to that Ronald Read level of wealth, you have to move past your personal biases and understand the invisible forces of luck and risk. We love to attribute our success to hard work and our failures to bad luck, but we rarely give that same grace to others. When we see a billionaire, we assume they're geniuses. When we see a bankrupt person, we assume they're lazy. The reality is that both luck and risk are cousins. They are both the reality that sometimes things happen that are completely outside of your control. If you ignore the role of luck in success, you'll try to replicate a formula that was actually just a fluke. And if you ignore the role of risk, you'll assume you're invincible right before the floor falls out from under you. This script is about breaking that cycle. It's about understanding that the game of money in the U.S. isn't played on a calculator. It's played in the theater of your mind. Part 2, The Eighth Wonder and Survival Trap. If I told you to name the greatest investor of all time, you'd probably say Warren Buffett. And you'd be right, but you're probably right for the wrong reasons. Most people think Buffett is a billionaire because he's a genius at picking companies. While he is certainly talented, his real alpha isn't his brain, it's his watch. Buffett started investing when he was 10 years old. By the time he was 30, he had a net worth of about $1 million, which is roughly $9.3 million in today's money. That's impressive, but it's not world's richest man impressive. The real magic happened later. If you look at his net worth, more than 95% of it came after his 65th birthday. Think about that for a second. Our brains are not wired to understand compounding. We think in linear terms. If I ask you what 8 plus 8 plus 8 is, you can give me the answer instantly. But if I ask you what 8 times 8 times 8 times 8 is, your brain starts to smoke. Compounding is like a snowball rolling down a mountain. At first, it's tiny and moves slowly. You look at it and think, this is a waste of time. This is where most Americans quit. They say for 2 years, see their account has only grown by a few $1,000s, and decide to spend on a vacation or a new truck because the system isn't working. But compounding is backloaded. All the massive gains happen at the very end of the timeline. The secret to wealth isn't earning the highest returns. It's earning pretty good returns that you can stick with for the longest period of time. This is where the concept of staying wealthy becomes more important than getting wealthy. Getting wealthy requires you to be an optimist, to take risks, and to put yourself out there. Staying wealthy, however, requires the exact opposite. It requires a level of paranoia. It requires a humility to realize that what you have can be taken away at any moment. In the U.S., we are obsessed with the home run. We want the crypto coin that goes up 10,000%, or the startup that goes public. But the real winners are the people who simply refuse to die. Survival is the most underrated skill in finance. If you can stay in the game without going bust, without being forced to sell during a market crash, and without losing your cool when your neighbor gets rich off a meme stock, you will eventually win by default. This is because the market is designed to transfer money from the impatient to the patient. But patience is hard when you're bombarded with news cycles telling you the world is ending. We have a negativity bias because, evolutionarily, it was more important to notice the tiger in the bushes than the berries on the tree. In finance, this translates to us being obsessed with the next crash. Every year, some genius on TV predicts a total economic collapse. And eventually, they'll be right. But if you listen to those people for the last 30 years, you would have missed out on the greatest period of wealth creation in human history. To survive, you need room for error. This is the gap between what you think will happen and what can happen. Most people plan their finances based on their best case or average scenario. They think, I make $80,000 a year, my expenses are $60,000, so I can afford this mortgage. But they don't plan for the worst case scenario, the job loss, the medical emergency, or the 40% market drop. Room for error isn't just a financial cushion. It's a psychological one. It's the sleep at night factor. If you have enough cash in the bank to survive for a year without a paycheck, you won't panic when the stock market drops. You'll be able to stay rational while everyone else is acting on emotion. Wealth is essentially the ability to ignore the world's madness because you've built a fortress around your own life. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the person who can't be knocked out of the game. When you realize that time is the most powerful variable in the wealth equation, your entire strategy shifts. You stop looking for the best investment and start looking for the investment you can hold for 50 years. Part 3. The admission fee of success. One of the hardest things for any investor to accept is that the stock market is not a vending machine where you put in work and get out a reward. It's more like a giant, chaotic party where you have to pay a very expensive and unpredictable admission fee. Most people, when they see their portfolio drop by 20% or 30%, feel like they've done something wrong. They feel like they're being punished. They look at that loss as a fine, like a speeding ticket. And what do you do when you get a fine? You try to avoid it. You change your behavior so you never have to pay it again. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how wealth works. Volatility, the wild ups and downs of the market, is not a fine. It's a fee. It is the price of admission for the returns you want. If you want to go to Disneyland, you don't show up at the gate and get angry that they're charging you $100 to get in. You recognize that the price is worth the experience. Investing is the same. The price of getting an 8% or 10% annual return over 30 years is the gut-wrenching feeling of watching your life savings evaporate during a recession. If you can't pay that price, you don't get the returns. It's that simple. But because we see it as a fine, we try to time the market. We think we can hop out right before the drop and hop back in right before the rise. This is the most expensive mistake you can make. Data shows that if you miss just the 10 best days in the stock market over the last few decades, your total returns will be cut in half. The problem is that the best days usually happen right in the middle of the worst periods. You have to be there for the pain, to be there for the gain. In America, we are conditioned to want everything now. We want high-speed internet, fast food, and instant wealth. But the market doesn't care about your timeline. It operates on its own schedule. This leads to the end of history illusion, where we think that the way the world looks today is the way it will always look. When things are going well, we think we're geniuses and that the bull market will last forever. When things are going badly, we think the American experiment is over and we're heading for a dark age. Both of these views are wrong. The world is a constant cycle of unprecedented events. People often say, well, this time is different because of X, Y, and Z. And they're right. Every crisis is different. But human nature is always the same. Greed and fear are the two constants of the financial world. To master part 3, you have to accept that you are not as rational as you think you are. You might say you have a high risk tolerance when the market is at an all-time high, but you don't actually know your risk tolerance until you're lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering if you'll ever be able to retire. This is why Housel suggests that being reasonable is better than being rational. A rational person would look at the math and say, I should never hold cash because it loses value to inflation. But a reasonable person says, I keep 10% of my net worth in cash because it makes me feel safe, and feeling safe prevents me from doing something stupid with the other 90%. The goal of your financial plan should not be to maximize every single penny. It should be to maximize your ability to stick with the plan. If you can't stick with it, the best plan in the world is actually the worst plan for you. The price of wealth is uncertainty, and you have to be willing to pay that price every single day for decades. If you try to cheat the system and find a way to get the returns without the volatility, you'll end up falling for a scam or taking on leverage that will eventually blow you up. Accept the fee, pay it with a smile, and realize that the boring path is actually the fastest way to get where you're going. Part 4, the invisible wealth and the status trap. We live in a world that is visually obsessed. Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube have created a culture where if you don't show it, you don't have it. This has created a massive confusion between two very different things, being rich and being wealthy. This distinction is the most important lesson for anyone living in a high-consumption society like the United States. Being rich is about current income. It's about the car you drive, the house you live in, and the designer clothes you wear. It's easy to see who is rich. You just look at their stuff. But wealth is different. Wealth is the money that isn't spent. It's the stocks you haven't sold, the assets you haven't liquidated, and the options you haven't used. Wealth is invisible. This creates a huge problem for us as social animals. We learn how to do things by observing others. We can observe how people spend money, but we can't observe how they save it. We see the guy in a Ferrari and we think, man, he's successful. But we don't know if he's actually wealthy. He might have a $2 million a year income, but if he's spending $2.1 million a year to maintain that lifestyle, he's actually poor in a very dangerous way. He is one bad month away from total ruin. Meanwhile, the guy driving a 10-year-old Toyota might have $5 million in a brokerage account. He is wealthy, but because he's not showing it, no one aspires to be like him. We aspire to the rich person's lifestyle without realizing that the stuff they have is actually the enemy of wealth. Every dollar you spend on a status symbol is a dollar that isn't compounding for your future. This is what Housel calls a man in the car paradox. When you see someone driving a fancy car, you don't think, wow, that guy is cool. You think, wow, if I had that car, people would think I was cool. The irony is that no one is looking at the driver. They're only using the car as a projection of their own desire for status. In the U.S., we have tied our self-worth to our net worth, and specifically to the visibility of that net worth. This is a trap that is almost impossible to escape because the goalposts always move. If you get a 10% raise, you don't feel 10% wealthier because you immediately upgrade your lifestyle to match your new peers. You move into a nicer neighborhood, and suddenly your old BMW looks like a piece of junk compared to the neighbor's Porsche. You are on a hedonic treadmill, running faster and faster just to stay in the same place. The only way to win this game is to stop playing it. You have to realize that enough is a power move. Having enough means you're no longer a slave to the opinions of people you don't even like. Wealth, in its purest form, is optionality. It is the ability to wake up and say, I can do whatever I want today. It's the ability to quit a job you hate, to move to a new city, or to take a year off to be with your kids. You can't buy that with a Ferrari. In fact, the Ferrari often takes that away because now you have to keep working that high-stress job just to make the payments. True wealth is a gap between your ego and your income. If you can keep your ego small while your income grows, you'll become wealthy faster than you ever thought possible. But this requires a level of internal validation that most people haven't developed. You have to be okay with people thinking you're average or even struggling because you're not wearing the latest trends. You have to find your value in your freedom, not in your possessions. This is the hardest part of the psychology of money because it goes against our evolutionary drive to climb the social ladder. But remember, the ladder is leaning against a wall that doesn't lead to happiness. It only leads to more wanting. Part 5. Freedom is the only real dividend. So, what is the point of all of this? Why save? Why invest? Why deal with the stress of the market? It's not so you can die with the biggest number on your bank statement. It's for one thing and one thing only: freedom. In the last 50 years, the United States has become incredibly wealthy. We have more gadgets, more medicine, and more convenience than any generation in human history. But if you look at the data, we aren't any happier than people were in the 1950s. Why? Because we've traded our control over time for more stuff. In the 1950s, a single income could buy a house and support a family. People worked their 9 to 5, and then they were done. Today, we are tethered to our phones, checking emails at dinner, and working side hustles because we're constantly trying to keep up with an ever-increasing standard of living. The greatest intrinsic value of money is its ability to give you control over your time. Being able to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, for as long as you want, is the highest dividend that money pays. This is why independence is a much better goal than rich. When you are independent, you don't have to be the smartest, fastest, or hardest working person in the room. You just have to be the one who doesn't have to be there. This gives you a massive psychological advantage. When you work because you want to, not because you have to, your performance actually improves. You become more creative, more patient, and more pleasant to be around. But to get to this point, you have to embrace a few uncomfortable truths. First, you have to accept that your financial plan is going to change because you are going to change. The end of history. Illusion applies to our personalities, too. The 18-year-old who wants to be a high-powered lawyer might become a 40-year-old who just wants to live on a farm. If you make extreme financial decisions based on who you are today, you're going to regret it later. This is why you should avoid extreme financial planning. Don't live like a miser today in the hopes of being a king tomorrow, and don't blow everything today and hope for a miracle. Aim for the middle. Save enough that you're building a future, but spend enough that you're enjoying the journey. Finally, you have to realize that nothing is as good or as bad as it seems. When you're winning, be humble. When you're losing, be patient. The world is much more complex than a simple success equals hard work narrative. There are billions of moving parts in the global economy, and you are just one of them. Focus on what you can control: your savings rate, your ego, and your time horizon. If you do those three things, the math will take care of itself. You don't need to find the next Amazon. You just need to not screw up the simple things. Stop trying to beat the market and start trying to beat your own impulses. The book, The Psychology of Money, isn't really about money. It's about the human condition. It's about our need for security, our desire for status, and our fear of the unknown. If you can master your psychology, you can master your life. Wealth isn't a number. It's a mindset. It's the quiet confidence of knowing that no matter what happens in the world, you have the resources and the temperament to handle it. So, as you finish this script, I want you to ask yourself, are you building a life that looks good to others or a life that feels good to you? Are you chasing more or are you chasing enough? The answer to that question will determine your financial future more than any stock tip or investment strategy ever will. Go build your fortress. Go buy your freedom. And remember, the best thing money can buy is the ability to stop thinking about money. That is the ultimate goal. That is the psychology of money. Now, go out there, be reasonable, be patient, and stay in the game. The janitor in you is waiting to turn those small, consistent actions into a legacy that will last forever.